If a black woman mocked by a call sign meant to belittle her had to dive into a canyon every pilot calls the coffin, would you believe she could fly back out? Why does everyone on base say no one flies into El Paso Ridge? No one who plans to live. What is 1722 cold stamped into the small steel tag Naomi Carter touches before she powers up? And why does the oldest seal on Viking 2, a man who's buried friends, whisper into a dead radio, either a madman or an angel? They were wrong about Naomi, but not in the way they expected. Naomi Carter stood in the hangar, the desert air heavy with the smell of oil and hot metal. Her hands were cracked, her knuckles rough, the kind of hands that told the story of years spent gripping wrenches, scrubbing carbon, and tightening bolts until they would never fail in the sky. Beside her moved Marco Alvarez, the crew chief who had known her long enough to trust her silence more than another man's speeches. He checked the logbook, tapped a line with a grease-stained finger, and muttered half stern and half teasing, hydraulic lines replaced, write it down. A leak up there means there won't be a second chance. Naomi gave a slight nod. Her eyes stayed fixed on the gleaming metal pipe, for her discipline began in the small things. Every rivet, every sound, every shadow mattered. She and Marco circled the A-10, inspecting landing gear, running hands along the wings, bending down to pick up a stray screw on the hangar floor. Marco chuckled softly. Another piece of FOD. You never leave anything behind, do you, Naomi? For the first time that day, she let out a quiet laugh. My father used to tell me, people can take your title, but they can't take your discipline. And with that one sentence, the memory of her father returned vivid and unshakable. A veteran of Iraq, he had been a man of few possessions, but endless resolve. Nights at the family table were simple bread beans, a pan of eggs when they were lucky. But every letter he wrote to her, ink, crooked paper worn, carried the same refrain. People can take your title, not your discipline. She had clung to those words ever since the day he never came back. The present intruded like a knife. In the mess hall, laughter rang out. Madge, Ron Dalton, his chest full of medals, and his tone always just a little too loud, leaned back with a tray of food. His eyes slid toward her as he announced for everyone to hear, needle belongs on a coat rack, not in a canyon. The younger men smirked. Naomi didn't reply. She simply stood tray, untouched, and walked out. She had learned that silence carried more weight than answering cruelty. Yet inside, the words still pressed against an old bruise. Back in the hangar, the A-10 waited. Inside the cockpit, fixed to the sidewall, was a small piece of steel. Stamped into it were 4 characters, 1722. Naomi reached out her fingers, tracing the grooves as if they were the only thing in the world that could steady her. The tag was her father's gift, his final reminder. Its meaning she kept to herself. Eyes closed, she inhaled once deeply. When she opened them again, her expression was calm, but there was something fierce beneath it, something only Marco ever noticed. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Naomi had no use for long pep talks. She had discipline, and one day the sky would give her a chance to prove it. Out beyond the hangar doors, desert winds stirred, lifting dust into thin spirals. Tomorrow, El Paso Ridge would no longer be rumor or warning. Tomorrow, the canyon would answer for her. The call came in the middle of the afternoon when the heat shimmered over the tarmac and the hangar seemed to hold its breath. A clipped voice cut through the static on the command net. Viking 2, pinned inside El Paso Ridge. Multiple hostiles, immediate CAS requested. Around the ops room, the mood shifted. Everyone knew El Paso Ridge. The canyon twisted like a serpent, narrow and unforgiving. Helicopters were ruled out, too exposed, too likely to be torn apart before they even entered. The F-16s were already too far out, their fuel clocks ticking toward bingo. That left one option. One aircraft fueled and armed still on the line. Naomi Carter's A-10. The silence in the room was heavy, almost accusatory. Papers stopped shuffling. Radios crackled with half-formed words that died before reaching the air. Every man there understood the math. The A-10 was built for endurance, for loitering low and slow over the battlefield when sleeker jets had to run home. It was simple, rugged, and easier to keep flying than the glass cockpit fighters that needed a small army of technicians. But simplicity came with risk. Flying low meant flying inside the enemy's teeth. The request came again. Any aircraft available for KIS confirm. Close air support to CAS was a plain idea wrapped in brutal stakes. The ground team points out the danger. The pilot removes it without harming the very people she came to save. There was no glamour in it, no roaring dogfights, no headlines, only the long grind of precision patience and the willingness to fly close enough to feel the dust rise from the shots you fire. No one volunteered. Heads dropped, eyes slid toward the floor. Then slowly, as if drawn by some unseen magnet, every gaze in the room shifted toward her. Naomi stood by the map wall, arms folded jaw, set her silence saying more than a dozen speeches could. Dalton broke it first, muttering under his breath, but loud enough for the room to hear, "That canyon will eat whoever tries. Better a machine than a woman with something to prove." No one laughed. Not this time. The weight of Viking Two's lives hung too heavy. Naomi's eyes stayed steady, unreadable. But inside something moved, a memory of her father's voice, a reminder of Marco's trust, and the unspoken truth that discipline wasn't just a word carved into steel. It was a debt waiting to be paid. No one would try, except her. The request for a pilot hung in the air like smoke. Naomi felt every eye, every whisper pressing in on her. And beneath it she heard something older, the ghost of laughter. That cruel sound from years ago, when she had misjudged a crosswind on a training run and clipped the edge of a target range. The A-10 had limped back her pride, even more battered than the aircraft. The jokes had spread fast, needle bends before it breaks. Now the canyon loomed in her mind, not just a place, but a verdict. El Paso Ridge was narrow, unpredictable. Too much like the valley where her father's convoy had been ambushed. He hadn't flown out. He hadn't come back at all. Naomi's chest tightened. Was she about to step into the same fate, only from the air? Dalton's voice cut through smooth as a blade. "For the record, I object. Air crew safety must come first. This is not a mission for someone with limited experience in terrain like that. We'll wait for another option." The words dripped with false concern, the edges sharpened by a bias everyone could hear. Limited experience. She had logged more hours in low-altitude casts than most of the room combined. But Dalton's phrasing was careful, calculated to sound official, safe, and irrefutable. A clipboard slid across the table, a refusal form, the kind of paperwork that meant nothing on the ground but everything in the air. Naomi reached for the pen. It hovered above the paper, her hand trembling with the weight of invisible hands, her father's absence. Dalton's doubt, the echo of her own past mistake. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. I can't risk them. I can't be him. I can't fail again. Then the present snapped back. Radios crackled, boots shuffled, breath quickened around her. Tunnel vision pressed at the edges of her sight, a human factor every pilot feared. She forced herself to breathe in 2 counts. Out 4. Her father had taught her that rhythm. Checklist breathing, the rails against panic. The pen tip grazed the paper. And then quietly but firmly, Marco spoke from behind her. 5 words, nothing more. "You can fly this, I promise." The pen stilled. Naomi's knuckles whitened. She didn't sign. Not yet. The hangar lights burned low as the desert sun began to fall. Naomi sat on the edge of the cockpit, ladder helmet in her lap, the refusal form still unsigned. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of metal cooling in the heat. Marco Alvarez approached without ceremony, the way crew chiefs do. No pep talk, no grand gestures. Just a man carrying the weight of years in grease and dust, the kind of years that taught you when to tighten and when to trust. He rested a hand on the A-10's skin, patting it like an old friend. "You remember the field drill at Holloman? You had 5 seconds to call that friendly position. If you'd been late, the convoy would have been shredded. But you weren't late. You never are." Naomi looked up, the shadow of doubt still on her face. Marco slid something from his pocket, a worn photograph, edges frayed, the ink fading. Her father's picture, the one he had carried during his deployment. Marco placed it carefully into the cockpit's side pouch, just beneath the steel tag stamped 1722. "This belongs here," Marco said simply. Naomi's throat tightened. She touched the photo, then the tag, as if the two were linked. A whisper escaped, not for Marco, but for the man in the picture. "Dad, I owe you one good flight." Marco didn't reply. He didn't need to. Crew chiefs build trust not in speeches, but in proof torque, checked twice, safety wire, twisted clean intakes, spotless, nothing left to chance. Naomi knew every bolt on this bird carried Marco's signature of care. In the flying world, that was the only vote that mattered. The camera of memory closed in the steel tag, 1722. its meaning still a mystery. The hum of the hangar seemed to fade until only one note remained low and sustained, as if the whole building held its breath. Naomi's hand lingered on the numbers. The pen had almost claimed her choice an hour ago, but now the decision felt closer, heavier, and more alive. The loop was still open. No one knew what 1722 meant, but tomorrow in the canyon, the answer would come. The moment of decision was over. Now came the work. Naomi climbed into the cockpit, settling into the familiar seat with a motion born of repetition. The straps clicked, the canopy sealed with a heavy clunk, and suddenly the hangar was no longer a place of whispers and doubt. It was a cocoon of glass and steel, humming with potential. Her hands moved across the switches with steady rhythm. Battery on, fuel pumps engaged. The growl of the A-10's engines rolled through the bay, low and deliberate like a beast waking from slumber. The crew outside signaled thumbs up. Marco stood just beyond the canopy rail, eyes fixed on her, not smiling, not waving, just holding her gaze. It was the only goodbye she needed. Taxi lights glowed as the Warthog rolled forward, tires crunching over the sun-baked pavement. Naomi guided her onto the line, the desert heat rising in visible waves. She checked her instruments once more. Hydraulics, steady flaps, responsive, fuel levels green. Every small confirmation mattered, each one another brick in the wall of discipline that held fear at bay. The tower cleared her. She pushed the throttles forward. The twin General Electric engines roared and the A-10 surged ahead, heavy but unstoppable. At the edge of the runway, the nose lifted. The earth fell away. For a moment, gravity seemed to clutch at the plane's belly, reluctant to let it go. Then the wings caught and Naomi was airborne. The desert spread out beneath her, a canvas of gold and stone. Heat shimmer blurred the horizon. She felt the drag of the air, thinner, here hotter, stealing lift from the wings. Density, altitude, every pilot's unseen enemy. High heat, thin air, it meant the engines worked harder, the wings carried less. Another reminder that El Paso Ridge would demand everything she had. Yet the A-10 was built for this kind of fight. Slower than the sleek fighters, yes, but slower meant more time to see, to aim, to decide. A second or two longer on target could be the difference between a team walking out alive and a team never coming home. Her airframe was thick-skinned, its systems redundant. Fuel lines doubled, controls backed up the cockpit, wrapped in a titanium bathtub. This wasn't elegance, it was stubborn survival. And in the desert, stubbornness was a virtue. The high-mounted engines hummed behind her, well clear of sand and debris, a design that kept them alive when others choked on grit. She thought of her father's words again. Discipline lives in the details. He'd be proud of this machine. Proud of the crew who kept it alive. Proud that she was at the stick. The radio crackled, breaking into her thoughts. A voice strained but steady. Viking 2 comms. Check. Anyone out there? Naomi pressed the mic switch. Viking 2, this is Dagger. I have you. A pause, then the voice of Sam, the oldest of the SEALs, gravelly and calm, even under fire. Dagger, angel or madman, we salute either way. Naomi's lips tightened into the smallest of smiles. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She skimmed lower, the ridges ahead, rising like teeth from the desert floor. The map said the canyon bent in predictable curves, but already she could see the mirages, the shifting shadows. Wind currents slashed through the rock like invisible knives, changing direction without warning. Terrain masking gave her cover. Enemy eyes on the ridges would lose her in the folds of stone, but it cut both ways. She would see them late, and they would see her late. Her fingers traced the throttles, feeling the vibration through the metal. The A-10 was steady, but the desert was not. And somewhere inside those walls of rock, men were waiting to kill her and the team she came to save. She exhaled slowly, pressing her breathing back into cadence, in for 2, out for 4. The ridge mouth yawned ahead. And then the warning came across her mind as clear as the radio. The wind shifted, the canyon no longer matches the map. The mouth of El Paso Ridge swallowed the A-10 whole. The radio hissed and cracked, a steady veil of static. Naomi adjusted her headset, filtering for the faintest signal. Then came the tailwind, a sly quartering push, tugging the Warthog toward the canyon wall. She countered with a firm touch on the stick, her jaw tightening. A seam of shadow on the rock caught her eye. She knew that shape, that unnatural outline. A PKM machine gun hidden in the stone barrel, glinting for only an instant. Viking 2, this is Dagger. I see a nest near your 12 o'clock ridge. The reply was faint words breaking through static. Confirm, can't move, pinned down. Naomi steadied her breathing. It was time for discipline, not panic. She keyed her mic again, her voice calm. I'll walk you through a KS9 line. Keep it plain. For the men on the ground and for the ears listening through the story, she broke it down into simple truth. Step 1, who you are and where you are. Step 2, where the target is relative to you. Think clock face and distance 3 o'clock 400 yards. Step 3, what you see rifle machine gun bunker. Step 4, remind me where you are so I don't mistake friend for foe. That's it. No codes, no maps. Just clarity. There was silence, then the crackle of reply. Viking 2. We're low wall north seam. Enemy dug in machine gun 3 o'clock 300 yards. Friendly's tight. Clear enough. Naomi nosed the A-10 deeper. The canyon narrowed, the walls closing in like jaws. The Venturi effect shoved the wind through each bend, a howling current that shoved her left, then right. Rotor turbulence whipped off sharp corners, shaking the wings. It felt less like flying than wrestling a giant invisible hand. Then the first eruption. An RPG lanced upward, a streak of smoke cutting across her canopy. Naomi yanked the stick, scraping the cliff face so close that shards of stone rattled against her wing. The A-10 groaned but held. Her breath came faster. She forced the rhythm back in 2 out 4. Checklist breathing, anti-panic rails. Dagger copy status, Viking 2's voice trembled across the air. I'm still here, she answered. The A-10 trembled under another gust. Naomi fought the stick, her eyes on the canyon's bend. 40 seconds until the wind turned again. 40 seconds before the mirages on her map would lie in a new direction. 40 seconds until the wind turns. The geometry of the canyon pressed against her mind. She knew what a few degrees of error could mean. At 3,000 feet, 1 degree was the width of a house. At 1,000 feet in this canyon, 1 degree meant the difference between hitting enemy rock and hitting the seals themselves. She adjusted the throttle, feeling the weight of those numbers in her fingertips. The A-10 wasn't elegant, but it was honest. It told you when you were off, it punished every mistake with raw physics. And it demanded courage to stay when every instinct begged to climb away. Naomi steadied the wings, her eyes darting between the instruments and the walls that seemed to close tighter with each second. She was still in the fight, but the canyon was no longer a place of stone. It was a trial built to test every weakness she had, and somewhere someone wanted her to fail. The canyon tightened until it felt like stone was pressing in on all sides. Naomi eased the stick forward, dropping the A-10 lower than doctrine would ever suggest. The walls loomed so close she could see striations in the rock lines of ancient sediment, now turned into the enemy's camouflage. She chose low, ultra-low, because it was the only way to mask her presence. Rock-absorbed radar broke sight lines and kept enemy gunners guessing until it was already too late. But flying low meant razor-thin margins. A breath too shallow, a twitch too sharp, and she would leave paint and her life on the canyon wall. Her thumb slid to the weapon's arm switch. The GAU-8 Avenger came alive beneath her, the nose-mounted cannon humming through the airframe. It wasn't just a gun. It was a piano of fire, each note devastating, each played only when the moment was perfect. Naomi steadied her breathing, forcing cadence. In for 2, out for 4. Her father's rails against panic. The SEALs needed her to be exact, not brave. She thought of the basics the way she'd explain it to a recruit in plain words. The GAU-8 is a massive cannon built right into the nose. When the nose is steady, the rounds land steady. Short bursts, not long streams. That's how you stay accurate and keep the barrels alive. She lined up her sight picture, visualizing angles rather than coordinates. Safety first always. I don't fire straight at them. I aim a little off so friendlies stay safe. It's not bravado, it's discipline. The term danger close pressed on her thoughts. It meant she was about to shoot so near her own team that the margin for error shrank to inches. If she was wrong by even the width of a man's helmet, Viking 2 would pay the price. She whispered into the mic, Viking 2. Daggers in hot. Her finger tightened, but not yet. She reminded herself why short bursts mattered. Heat would warp the barrels, long streams would scatter the rounds. Precision wasn't in how much lead you threw, but in how little you needed to throw. The A-10's nose dipped, steadying her whole body, becoming part of the machine. The canyon air trembled around her, waiting. If she was wrong by inches, the seals would die by her hand. The canyon erupted. The first burst from the GAU-8 tore through the valley like thunder given teeth. Brrr! The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. Stones shook loose from the cliffs, a cloud of dust boiled upward, and every firing point Naomi had marked winked out in an instant. Enemy guns went silent, bodies scattering for cover that no longer existed. For 3 heartbeats, it looked like the fight was over. Then came the hammerback, a flash on her right side impact. The A-10 lurched, alarms shrieking, master caution lights strobing red across her panel. She knew the sound before she even looked. Engine 2 flaming out, fuel pressure dropping. The beast was crippled. She gritted her teeth. One engine meant asymmetry, one side pulling harder than the other, the nose yawing toward the dead weight. In single-engine flight control came first, not firepower. She trimmed, nudged rudder, held her wings steady against the canyon's twisting air. A second RPG streaked upward. Naomi spotted the smoke trail, her mind flashing geometry, altitude, distance, angle. There was no time for theory. She banked just enough, threading the A-10 through a micro window barely wider than its wingspan. The RPG shot past, exploding harmlessly against the rock wall. Her father's voice rose in her memory, layered over the alarms, the chaos, the fear. An eagle only spreads wings in a storm. Naomi steadied her hands. She couldn't linger. Dust was rising from the first strike, heat, shimmer warping her sightline. Mirage could bend bullets, twist targets. A long second pass would tempt her into target fixation, a killer more certain than enemy fire. She refused the trap. Instead, she committed to the shortest second pass of her life. One quick dive, one line of fire, then out. Viking 2. "This is Dagger," she called, voice firm, though sweat rolled into her eyes. "Escape lane opening. Move when I pull up." She nosed down, lined her sight, and fired. Another roar from the Avenger cannon ripped the canyon floor, carving a path clean through the kill zone. The A-10 bucked, warning alarms layering over each other. Naomi's hands became a blur. 2 hands, 3 jobs all at once. One trimming asymmetry, one pulling for altitude, both managing throttle and rudder in a dance-only discipline made possible. Then silence. 1 second. 2. The jet climbed. The dust cleared. And below, Viking 2 moved. Shapes darted through the lane she had opened, breaking from cover, disappearing into the rocks beyond the ambush. The radio crackled again. A pause, then Sam's voice, steady, but weighted with awe. "Angel." Naomi didn't smile. She only breathed long and controlled. The mission wasn't over, not yet, but the canyon had spoken. The canyon lay behind her, shrouded in dust and silence. For a few fragile moments, the only sound in Naomi's world was the labored thrum of her one good engine and the steady pulse of her own breathing. Then the radio clicked alive. Voices hoarse, shaken, but alive. "Dagger, this is Viking 2. We're moving. We're clear." Another voice broke in, strained with emotion. It was Hank, the team leader. "We owe you our lives, every single one of us." Naomi held the mic, her thumb hovering. Gratitude pressed against her like a wave, but she would not let it drown her. Her father's words echoed again, discipline above titles, discipline above pride. Her reply was quiet, firm, and stripped of triumph. "Don't say that. Today belongs to discipline." There was silence on the net, the kind that carries respect better than applause. In the cockpit, Naomi adjusted her trim, checked her gauges again, her mind already shifting forward. Survival was never a finish line, it was only a waypoint. The A-10 trembled slightly, the single engine straining under the weight of desert heat. Out ahead, the horizon wavered in the shimmer, hiding dangers yet to come. Naomi knew this day wasn't done. The canyon had tested her. The storm had tried to break her. But the road home wasn't calm. The canyon fell behind, but the fight had not. Naomi coaxed the wounded A-10 forward, her hands steady on the throttles, though every vibration told her the airframe was tired. The single engine growled harder than it should, heat gauges creeping higher, needles flirting with the red. She ran the math in her head, discipline sharpening every figure. One engine meant no safety margin, no second try. The landing ahead would be her only approach. Fuel was running thin. The desert air gnawed at lift, and if she missed her mark, there would be no go-round. The base perimeter shimmered in the heat haze. Relief seemed near. And then sudden streaks in the sky, bursts of fire that didn't belong. Anti-air fire cracked open the horizon just outside the safe zone. Shells bloomed too close to be coincidence. Her breath froze. Someone knew her path. Someone wanted her silenced before she touched down. On the radio, Dalton's voice barked loud and certain, "Abort return. Divert to rotary. We'll send a helo to pull you out." Naomi almost laughed, a bitter sound. A helicopter, slow and soft-skinned in this desert of teeth. It would be a coffin of another kind. She keyed her mic voice level, decisive, negative. This bird lands on her own gear. The fire faded as quickly as it appeared, the desert quiet, resettling. But the doubt it left behind hung heavier than smoke. Had someone leaked her route? And why now, just as safety was in reach, Naomi brought the nose down, lining up for the strip. The emergency profile was already in her muscles. Hold speed, keep glide, slope steady, no flare too sharp, or the single engine would choke. Her father's mantra returned again, firm and grounding discipline above pride. Every gauge, every tremor, every heartbeat counted. She knew she was flying a coin toss, balancing metal and faith over an unforgiving desert. As the runway stretched long and thin before her, the question echoed sharper than any alarm. Who leaked and why exactly as she lands? The runway rose to meet her. Naomi held her breath as the wheels slammed down the whole frame, shuddering with the weight of its own survival. Sparks flew from the tires, a screech of rubber against scorched asphalt, and the A-10 staggered forward, trembling like a wounded animal that refused to collapse. She fought the rudder, trimmed the yaw, and brought the beast to heel. The single engine roared its last stretch, then eased into silence as the brakes held. Dust rolled past the canopy. The A-10 had stopped. She was home. For a long moment, no one moved. The flight line seemed frozen, caught between awe and disbelief. Naomi popped the canopy. Hot desert air rushed in, carrying the smell of fuel and burnt metal. She pulled her helmet, free hair damp with sweat, eyes calm but distant. Dalton was the first to step forward. His boots clicked sharp on the tarmac, his posture stiff. For weeks, months, years, his words had cut her, always dressed as caution, always laced with doubt. Now standing before her battered Warthog, he halted, straightened his shoulders, and raised his hand in a crisp salute. Naomi returned nothing but a steady look. She didn't need his salute, but she let him keep it. Behind them, the operations officers whispered urgently. Reports had come in about the air defense burst that nearly ended her return. At first, it smelled of betrayal of a traitor hidden inside the system, but the truth was harsher and smaller, no villain, only error. The no-fire map hadn't been updated in weeks. A boundary line had been drawn wrong. Sensor reflection off the canyon wall had created a phantom signal. A procedural fault, not a plot. It was not malice. It was discipline neglected. Naomi climbed down from the cockpit. Her boots touched the ground with the heaviness of both survival and unfinished duty. She reached into the side pouch and pulled free the small steel tag she had touched before every flight. 17, 22. Marco had joined her, now standing quietly at her side. He said nothing as Naomi turned the tag over in her hand. The etched numbers caught the last light of day. Slowly, she opened the folded slip of paper sealed behind it, a note her father had carried in Iraq, smudged and worn from sand and sweat. 17 field rules. 22 opening words. Her lips shaped them softly. Words more prayer than speech. Keep your discipline when the wind lies. The line hung in the air, simple yet unshakable. A rule written in blood and memory passed from father to daughter now lived in the canyon's echo. Dalton lowered his salute, his voice uncharacteristically low. You taught us that today. The air seemed to pause. No applause. No cheers. Just silence, thick and reverent. The kind of silence that honors both the living and the fallen. The desert grew quiet again. The jets of the day had come and gone, but the echo of one battle still lingered. And in that silence, an expert voice took shape, not triumphant, not boastful, but steady. Close air support has never been about glory. It has always been about humility and discipline. The pilot doesn't choose the fight. She arrives when others are already in it, when ground teams are pressed into the dust, when seconds mean lives. The job isn't to dazzle, it's to endure. That's why the A-10 plain and scarred carries a value that sleek fighters sometimes forget. It can stay longer, see clearer, and shoot truer. It was never meant to look beautiful. It was meant to be faithful. And Naomi Carter proved that truth in the canyon. 3 lessons stand now, not just for air crews or soldiers, but for anyone who still believes in discipline when the world grows loud. First, discipline beats prejudice. The canyon didn't care about the jokes, the nickname, or the doubts whispered in mess halls. It cared only about control, steadiness, and trust. And she gave it all 3. Second, procedures must live, not sit on paper. The phantom fire that nearly ended her was no betrayal, it was neglect. A line that hadn't been updated, a chart left to sleep. When procedures fail to breathe, people bleed. Naomi's survival is proof of why rules must be carried alive into every decision. Third, respect those who do the dirty work the right way. Close air support is never glamorous. It's dust, sweat, and danger at knife's edge. But when done right, it saves lives quietly without ceremony. And that respect is worth more than medals. Days later, in a simple classroom at the base, Naomi stood before a circle of young trainees. She didn't tell them about her canyon. She didn't need to. She only held the small steel tag 1722 and said softly, "If they call you a needle sharpened into a blade." Her words hung in the air, plain and unforgettable. And then the shock of truth, one line that will be repeated long after the dust settles. They meant to bury her in the canyon. She carved her name into the stone. If this story touched you, like, share, and comment so that one young person somewhere dares to stand steady when the wind lies.